Well, where it actually came from was I've always been a lifelong people watcher. I, at parties and bars and such, I'm social, but I always just like watching how people interact, you know, when they're hitting on each other, talking to each other. It's just interesting. And so when I was in graduate school, I became very, very interested in social versus private persona, how people would change from one situation to another. And I became interested also again in fairy tales, and it doesn't sound like they're necessarily related right away, but I felt that it was a way of societal rules being handed down in an oral tradition. A fairy tale, you know, good girl, this happens to them, or bad boy, this happens to them, and so you start learning societal rules in story form. And so they became my inspiration, and they're actually an inspiration for a lot of the pieces, but the viewer may not get that right away, and that's really okay. It was just kind of a fun added extra layer to these. And so the mask came from, actually it came out of one bird woman like character that appeared over and over in my prints, and she was my instigator. She was my bird of prey, the one that started all the trouble. Usually in a pack of people, there's usually a leader that's the alpha female, especially among women who, you know, or an alpha male that starts all the trouble. And so that character appeared a lot, and so then it morphed into more and more characters having the masks. And these actually came from a trip when we were in Italy. My students were playing cards and joking around with masks, and so I asked them, I said, do you guys mind if I take some pictures? And they said, only if you make prints of it. So so a lot of them are based off of sketches and photographs that I took whenever they would mess around with those Venetian masks, and they actually painted them themselves, and you know, they'd forget that you're there after a while, so you were really capturing some really interesting moments and watching people interact with each other. So yes, it did. I actually studied Native American and Mesoamerican studies for quite a while in undergraduate school. I actually took a lot of classes in Native American and Mesoamerican art and culture, and that was probably one of my favorite areas to study. And so became very interested in you know, the duality of identity. You know, you put on the mask, you become somebody else, and and you become that entity when you don the mask. And so that's also part of an influence in these as well. So sure, I'm always interested in telling stories. I've always liked to, you know, plus I've had some really interesting things happen in my life, so, you know, it always makes for a good, entertaining story, and so I've always been attracted to narratives, and I imagine that I always will be. I'll probably always continue to experiment with how they get told. Some will be straightforward and others more indirect, but I imagine I'll probably be interested in narrative for quite a while. So I'm liking the collage aspect of some of the pieces, you know, actually ripping things apart that aren't working and then making them into something else. I like the idea of taking parts and assembling to get something that I really, really want. Because part of it's a challenge. It's like a Rebus puzzle that you're trying to figure out, a series of symbols that you're trying to make say something, and there's more of a challenge in that. So I tend to have a fun time doing that as well. And usually both series, if I get kind of burned out on one, I'll go to the other. And so yeah.